What's up, Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Nike NXXT Genisus, and although it looks like the next gen, it is definitely its own shoe. It is definitely a unique shoe in the lineup. Is that a good or a bad thing? Let's get into it. Now, starting off in the uppers, the one thing that is retained from the next gen to the NXXT Genisus is the Nike sphere that goes all the way around the heel counter. You also get quite a bit of bulky padding around the heel counter. Remember, Nike sphere is basically just little outcroppings of foam that allow more airflow. It's interesting though, as you go into the forefoot, right? I mean, under the tongue, it's actually a little bit more thin padding. But as you go into the forefoot, yeah, it's padded, but I think Nike sphere would be a little bit better used, you know, in the mid and forefoot. Although it does do a nice job of increasing a little more of the air circulation, because remember, your foot is not smashing up against the foam in the inside of the shoe. It's hitting those spheres, right? And then there's some air pockets underneath of there to allow little corridors for airflow, which, like I said, is nice. And like I said, as you go into the forefoot, the tongue is gusseted, which is nice. And like I said, the tongue, on the outside, it has some waffling, but on the inside, it is just solid backed paneling with some padding. Look at this thing on the breathability test. It heat up 111.3 degrees. But the interesting thing is, remember, that's internal temperature after 30 seconds of heating. The peak external temperature in the tongue got to 120 degrees, and in the forefoot got to 80 degrees, even with all of that padding. So it is still handling that heat okay. You know, the heat is finding ways to escape the shoe, which is nice. Look at the breathability mapping though. You can see the only place fog is getting out is the sides of the tongue, like I said, because it's although on the outside it looks like there's some breathing, and on the medial side it looks like there might be a little bit more opportunity for breathing, but it is pretty solid backed paneling. So it handles heat better than it handles moisture. As you go to the outside of the shoe, it is a very intricate and tightly woven TPU mesh out there. All the lace outlets are that quasi outrigger, but it does have lace loops that go through the tongue plus the gusset. So honestly, lockdown on these things is fantastic. Whether I tried a runner's knot in these or not, I had really none to very, very mild heel movement. Heel slippage was nothing. I did find if I did do the runner's knot in these things, I got quite a bit of lace irritation in the tongue. It really did not go away even after break-in, and then putting an orthotic in that even accentuated it. So honestly, I'd just be lacing these straight up, really no fancy stuff, and it still locks down just fine. It is nice though that they're reinforced with some stitching on the upper side of that. I did find that really nice. Now these things on the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, and the pleather, yeah, I mean the burr starts to work it, and it does also start to work the TPU mesh, but it does not get through either of those layers. That being said, I could see this stuff catching like crazy on more gritty outdoor courts. On indoor courts though, I think the friction doesn't get really that high on these if you're a dragger or slider. So I think on indoor courts, the uppers are gonna be just fine. On outdoor courts, maybe say la vie after a little bit of catching on that. Now, as you go into the rear foot, the next gen had a really small piece of plastic for an external heel counter. These actually have a bigger piece of plastic for an external heel counter. That does complement a pretty darn strong internal heel counter. So in terms of the rear foot, honestly, they're pretty stiff, right? I mean, it does take a little bit to break these in. That stiffness does also come with it some feelings of security, which is nice, but just remember, with all of that reinforcement, all those layers in there, get ready for the uppers to feel a little bit stiff for a little bit longer than most shoes. All right, but getting into where I think all the arguments are gonna start on the next Genisus, if it's better or worse than the next gen, that is the midsole teardown. On these ones, basically get an entire bed of, it does appear to be Phylon. It feels more like injection molded Phylon, I will say though. It does feel dense, but a little bit more springy and bouncy than some of the more deadened Phylons we see in some shoes. I'm not positive of that, but it definitely feels a little bit more springy. And then in the forefoot Zoom Turbo unit, as you can see, we do not have a rear foot Zoom unit in these, and there is no top-loaded shank. That's been substituted for a bottom-loaded carbon fiber shank that basically just spans the entire midfoot. Some people are gonna like that. Some people are probably maybe not going to like that from the next gen. To me, it's just different. You know, I think both of them, honestly, the midsoles feel pretty good. Like I said, just a little bit different. If these things on the bounce height test did get 35 centimeters in the heel, 43 in the forefoot, so you know, the shoe does not feel deadened whatsoever. I will say the thing that I noticed the most was the absence of the top-loaded shank just kind of going from stride to stride. These ones definitely feel, like I said, maybe just a little bit more bottom stable versus the next gen, which you actually did feel like maybe it had just a little bit more kick. Is it all that noticeable? Put it this way, I don't think it's a deal breaker. I've been getting into the outsole tread. Honestly, I was not sure what to think about this when I took them out of the box. It is just a very gentle herringbone. Honestly, it looks just like competing delta patterns going all the way down the shoe. It is a full-length rubber, but the tread has two distinct pods in it. Although you look at the grip test ramp, it slips at 38 degrees, which, you know, isn't, for what the profile is, I honestly didn't think that was that bad. Look at it under the microscope, you do get micro gridding on them, which is really nice. I noticed that the dust pickup wasn't crazy. The grip on them, no, is not super tacky, but it is super consistent. You can really kind of trust when you go out on the court, that's what the grip is, right? It's just a little, you got a little bit of give to it, nothing that I was sliding out with. And because the orientation of the rubber, even though it is a little bit more substantial rubber, right? The durometer is a little bit higher, it does bend pretty easy. So you get a little bit more feel and flexibility in the rubber than you think you're going to. Like the uppers are pretty stiff, right? The rear foot's stiff, like the shoe in general is a little stiff, right? And it does break in, but it's a little stiff. But the rubber is just better than you think it's gonna be, which was really a pleasant surprise for me. Look at it on the outsole durability test though, 10-second highest grit sandpaper. And yeah, I mean, I did get a millimeter of damage on this. Like I said, durometer was, you know, over 19, so it's not soft rubber, but I did get a millimeter of damage. The thing is that it's pretty chunky rubber. And so I think, you know, on indoor courts, I think it's just gonna load share pretty well. It moves really well, right? Like I don't know how many people are playing on, you know, a rotary burr. So I think just the way the shoe kind of moves, I think the durability is actually gonna be somewhat decent. I think on outdoor courts, you're gonna start to wipe away the micro gridding. So you're gonna get rid of some of the best parts of them. Although I do think on outdoor courts, like I said, just because of the chunkiness of the rubber, I still think they'll be okay unless you're dragging and sliding a lot. Then I could see them starting to wear down pretty darn quick. And look at these things on the speed ratio. They come in at a 2.49, a shank score of 0.1, brings it up to a 2.59. And yeah, I think once they break in, that's pretty accurate. They do kind of feel like a diving board when you first get them on. Because like I said, they're kind of stiff. So they kind of just, you know, they kind of move quick, right? They get through the gait cycle pretty quick. It's almost like having a leaflet, you know, under your foot, because like I said, they're a little stiff. Once they break in though, they feel easier to get from step to step and they move a little bit quicker. I do think the next gen is a little bit just snappier of a shoe, but also with some break-in going north to south, I think these get up to that level. In terms of side to side movement, it's nice that they're bottom stable without being ridiculously bottom heavy, but the rubber on the next gen being a little bit thinner and then also just, you know, having that street mat pattern, I just felt like it had a little bit more nimble grip, kind of going side to side. They're just a little bit easier going side to side with, whereas the next Genesis seems a little bit more of a north to south shoe, a coast to coast shoe. I mean, like I said, if you're good enough, you'll be able to use them probably the same, but I'd say the tools in the next gen, maybe just a little bit snappier, a little bit quicker in the next Genesis. Like I said, really nice going north to south. All right, but getting into the fit of the next Genesis, these things had a resting position of 1 degree everted on the right foot and a little bit of manufacturing issue on the left. This actually had a 4 degree eversion because it just wasn't, the rear foot wasn't completely flat, the rubber. So I'm guessing it's the right foot that was the correct one. That's 1 degree everted just in resting. And then in the loaded stance, it was 3 degrees everted. So these things allowed 2 degrees of eversion. So not a ton, but a little bit of give there. They did come in at an 11 degree in flare, so pretty middle of the road. They did come in at a hair long though, at 29 centimeters in length, which I didn't really feel. And then 9.6 centimeters metatarsal width, only 10.5 of toe box width, and a toe box taper of 27 degrees. The reason I say I didn't feel that length a lot is because, like I said, they do feel a little bit low volume in the foot, especially once you throw an orthotic in there. Like I said, the uppers will break in. They just take a little bit of time. I'd say a narrow medium foot, I just go true to size on these things just because you'll get a little bit more room in there. A 2E, I do think you can break in true to size. I did, they just felt stiff. I didn't have any cramping in them, which was nice, but I just could feel hugging. Now, if you want that, a little bit weight reduction, you want that glove-like fit, but I don't think going up a half size as a 2E is prohibitive at all. A 4E, I'd probably be going up a size in these things. I'd say if you're really short-toed, maybe try to break these in 1/2 size up as a 4E, but if you're longer, then I think it's no problem going up that size, like I said, because just the volume in the shoe in terms of height, especially if you're putting an orthotic in these, you'll probably need a little bit more room. Like I said, length and width-wise are actually pretty, pretty mellow. It's just they feel a little bit more glove-like because of the volume in them. In terms of people I'd be recommending these for, someone that wants a little bit more of a bottom stable shoe without being, like I said, super bottom heavy, that is going more north to south, right? I don't think they're bad for ankle sprainers by any means. They don't really don't have a lateral flange to speak of. It's just a little bit more wide in the forefoot, right? It's a little more circular up there, so that's how it creates stability. I never felt unstable in them whatsoever. That bottom loaded shank that's just a hair long does do a nice job of keeping the bottom of these shoes really stable. The forefoot zoom turbo unit plus the bottom loaded shank is really nice for people with forefoot pain. The only thing is if you're someone that doesn't want to scrunch your toes in, that's where I think you're gonna have the issues. But an orthotic in these, plus somebody with a little more of a narrow medium foot, really does a nice job for rear foot and forefoot. And the fact that these just keep you pretty darn stable. I think also someone that wants a pretty consistent gripping shoe without it being a super tacky shoe. Are you gonna like the next gen or the next Genisus more? Honestly, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. If you were really married to that, rear foot zoom, you might not like these. If you'd rather have the bottom loaded carbon fiber, feel a little bit more of the filing underneath your foot, you'll like these more. If you want a little bit more of a stiff rear foot, you might like these more. Like I said, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, the two of them. I think some people are gonna say, these are, a tear down of the next gen. Some people are gonna say like these are a step up. Like I said, it's all gonna be up to you. I'd love to know your thoughts though, which one you like more. If you're going for these, you're going for next gens, you're not going for either of them. Let me know in the comments down below. And if you do wanna see something a little bit different that came across my desk in the Nike space, the Nike Hyper Smash, which is kind of like a nod to the Nike Hyper Dunk from 2008 with its own little quirks and differences, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect, rubber, and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.